That's right, you're watching Insights from Africa here on Business Day TV, and today we're taking a look at what could be in store for us in 2026. Ahead of the break, we unpacked what that looked like in terms of expectations for the globe and sub-Saharan Africa, and now we turn to South Africa. On the whole, 2025 wasn't a bad year. The country exited the Financial Action Task Force grey list. It received credit ratings upgrades, inflation and fuel prices eased, and SA also achieved notable sporting wins, all contributing to starting 2026 on a firmer footing. But has South Africa turned a corner? I posed this to Standard Bank's chief economist Gulam Balam, so let's take a look.
Global growth this year is likely to be synchronized more than not. African and South African growth, of course, South Africa is part of the continent, but they will be mutually reinforcing. So your suggestion of a good neighborhood, South Africa offers the rest of the region that good neighborhood buffer. To be more specific, for every 1 percentage point growth in South Africa, it lifts neighborhood growth by around 0.7 of a percentage point. And of course, growth in the region therefore provides a positive halo for the continent, for South Africa. So yes, mutually reinforcing. And with respect to South Africa turning the corner, we do believe those numerous milestones of 2025 anchor the idea of stabilization. And therefore, 2026 is about building momentum. Not searching for a miracle, but searching for compounding. Compounding last year's achievements. And compounding will relate to how the president, for example, this year addresses crime, the incapacitated state, with emphasis on municipalities and metros. Those are just two areas where interventions that can be substantial can turn the dial, so to speak. We, for example, have observed how local dynamics, municipal dynamics, influence national outcomes, influence national GDP. And so these are two areas that the president can show muscle, show energy and verve that will be his priority focuses this year. And I think what that will do is compound the successes of last year. But I think if we are going to rely solely on last year's achievements as enduring legacy for buoyant or accelerating growth, I think we're going to be dismayed.
A critical year then. If we do get some of these things right, do you think we're on track for ratings upgrades?
I do think that over the next 2 years, further ratings upgrade, following S&P's favorable outcome last year, a favorable and judicious outcome last year, could be in the offing. Of course, it will be anchored by perhaps two things: fiscal consolidation and accelerating growth. Growth is a very substantial panacea for a lot of social ills. And however, it requires fervent governance, just general underpin of the rule of law. And I think if the president approaches 2026 with that in mind, hence my alluding to the incapacitated state and just general criminality, to the extent that it buttresses the rule of law positively, it will further reinforce the macro dynamics that have been positively in play.
Gulam, you have said that South Africa is facing its best macro environment in a decade at the moment. Give us some insight into why you say that.
So it's simply in reference to potential. The reform agenda has shown good traction in recent years, and we've had favorable outcomes with respect to electricity and logistics. Electricity, most part on Eskom, but of course there's other downstream failures, but generally speaking, those have been two areas of success in the reform agenda. They reinforce the private sector's role in remediating South Africa's shortcomings. The sporting dynamic, which you alluded to, also reinforces that when systems work, South Africa can achieve exceptional results. So we have the reform agenda. We also have some cyclical forces that are coming together very nicely. Real incomes are strong. Inflation is falling, and with it, interest rates have fallen and will fall further in all likelihood. The stock market has risen handsomely, and that has buoyed balance sheet wealth, helping to engender additional proclivity for spending, particularly on durable goods and services. And also just general employment seems to be bubbling favorably. In other words, even though growth has been weak, it has been job-creating growth rather than jobless growth. So when you assemble all of these forces together, then they do provide a compelling clutch of forces to suggest it'll engender momentum and diversified growth sources, not reliant on a single source of thrust.
So that's some of the tailwinds that are propelling us forward as we perhaps turn that corner and gain momentum, all things going well. But on the horizon is the local elections that are coming up, and that bringing into focus the ANC. We have seen the ruling party lose its dominance over the years. How are you reading that all playing out? Should we be seeing this as a risk event, so to speak, or is it something that we keep a close eye on, and depending on what comes out, that shapes how we move forward?
Politics has been routinely bedeviling of South Africa's economic prospects. In fact, sometimes politics has been absolutely bludgeoning. So you're correct in suggesting that the local government elections, maybe later this year, early into 2027, when the window allows, is material. Because we have already seen in 2021 how that local government elections engendered coalition governments at metro level, for instance. And in fact, it created 66 councils. We saw how in 2024, the national elections also gave birth to the GNU, a coalition at national level. So we entered the structural domain of coalitions for local government in 2021 and national level in 2024. It's part of our future. And we have to make these coalitions work. We've seen the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, and of course the other 8 parties that are part of the GNU, find each other for the most part over the last 2 years, and we think it'll prevail. There's more incentive for, especially the large party, to stay in the GNU than to exit, so we foresee it favorably. But it's going to be fiercely contested at the local level to some degree, inciting tension within the GNU. We need local government election coalitions that do not deliver a substantial portfolio of parties running a local city, where the mayor emerges from a small party, where transactional politics dominates and self-interest is easily able to dwarf citizens' interests. So we need perhaps larger parties and a large party to emerge and fewer parties to form coalitions, perhaps as the formula for better policy making, for better execution. One big nudge at the minimum would be to encourage South Africans to vote. We lament abundantly, but yet in the last national elections, only about 46% of registered voters participated. Only about 30% of eligible, meaning adult, voters actually went to the polls. So there's been voting fatigue. And South Africans need to lean in at the minimum, whoever they vote for. Just get out and vote and choose our political substance that is deeply informing of the macroeconomic path.
You highlight 2 interesting things there. One being this disillusionment with voting and low voting levels. And in that comes this idea or this need, or the stats that at least point to it, that people are very unhappy. As much as the elections are a risk, do you see social unrest as a risk as we go towards those elections? Because service delivery, let's be honest, really not where it should be.
I like your question because it suggests that even though there is apathy and non-participation, diminished participation in elections, it is finding release valve elsewhere. And if you look at service delivery protests last year at around 259, it was the highest it has been in about 10 years, only surpassed in 2018. So there is deep unhappiness on the ground. People are mostly concerned about the failure of utilities to service them. So whether it is electricity breakdowns because of municipal shortcomings, even though there is strong upstream capacity, for example, at Eskom, water, of course, is the latter-day fissure and failure that is immensely disturbing and traumatizing of societies. So people are showing apathy with respect to elections. However, they are expressing themselves less concerned about ideology and more concerned about service delivery and more concerned about pervasive other social vulnerabilities, where there's crime, corruption, inequality, just general government incapacity, an economy that isn't generating jobs sufficiently. All of these things are galvanizing, and they're finding expression at a local government election, whereas ordinarily you think these would be primarily national themes. So the local is influencing national, and people are thinking about it that way.
Given this context, some of the risk events that could come up, some of the tailwinds that we're seeing coming through, where are you in terms of your growth projection for South Africa for this year?
So we're looking at around about close to 2% for 2026. We think we can muster 1.8. We think we'll eclipse 2% next year, 2027, all things holding steady, and continue to ascend gradually towards 3%. Anything better than 3% is likely to remain elusive over the horizon until we get a more becalmed political environment and a long-range becalmed political environment. So, we just have a big calendar. Local government elections this year, in all likelihood, ANC party elections at the end of 2027, national elections in 2029. So we need a maturity in terms of coalition government. We need rules that govern how they engage and greater norms and standards to overcome fissures and shortcomings. And if we're able to do that with the idea of having smaller coalitions, fewer parties, maybe that also can hopefully reduce the transactional nature of South African politics.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Insights from Africa. But if you want more content like this, or if you want to rewatch any of the discussions we've had on the show, you can find them on the Business Day TV YouTube channel under the Insights from Africa playlist. And if you follow us on social media, you can stay up to date with all our content. So be sure to find us on X, TikTok and LinkedIn. So from me, Bronwyn Seaborn, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now. Insights from Africa is brought to you in partnership with Standard Bank.